He watched his family die before his eyes. Chained and sold into slavery in a distant African kingdom, he believed he would never see home again. But the slave everyone overlooked would one day change the faith of an entire nation. The 4th century was a time when Christianity was spreading rapidly across the Roman world, but vast regions of Africa still knew little about the gospel. Merchant ships crossed the Red Sea every day, carrying silk, spices, gold, ivory, and travelers between the Roman Empire, Arabia, India, and the powerful Kingdom of Axum. It was a dangerous route where storms, pirates, and hostile tribes threatened every voyage. Among those travelers was a young Christian named Frumentius. He journeyed with his family and several companions, hoping to explore distant lands while sharing their faith wherever they went. His parents believed that every journey offered an opportunity to serve Christ. But one afternoon, everything changed. As the ship anchored near the African coast to collect fresh water, armed raiders suddenly attacked. Chaos erupted within moments. Merchants tried to flee while sailors desperately fought back, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. Frumentius watched in horror as his companions were killed one by one. His parents never escaped. Still only a boy, he and another young survivor named Adesius were captured alive. Bound with heavy ropes, they were taken inland and eventually brought before the royal court of Axum. The king immediately noticed something different about the two young prisoners. Unlike the other captives, they remained calm. They obeyed respectfully. They spoke several languages. Most importantly, they could read and write. Recognizing their intelligence, the king refused to sell them. Instead, he placed them within the royal household as servants. Although still slaves, their lives changed dramatically. Years passed. Frumentius faithfully completed every task entrusted to him. He managed supplies, helped organize official documents, assisted royal advisors. Little by little, the king began trusting him with increasingly important responsibilities. Yet, despite receiving privilege inside the palace, Frumentius never forgot who he truly served. Every morning before sunrise, he prayed. Every evening, he thanked God for preserving his life. Even in slavery, he believed God still had a purpose. Eventually, the aging king died unexpectedly. His heir was still only a child. Before his death, the king entrusted the young prince and the kingdom's administration to Queen Sophia, assisted by Frumentius. Suddenly, the former slave found himself advising the royal family itself. He could have pursued wealth. He could have sought revenge. Instead, he chose something else. He quietly encouraged Christian merchants traveling through Axum to remain in the kingdom. He arranged places where they could gather for worship. He welcomed believers from distant lands. Without drawing attention to himself, Christianity slowly began taking root. Years later, once the young prince reached adulthood and assumed the throne, Frumentius realized his work in Axum was only beginning. He traveled to Alexandria in Egypt to meet one of Christianity's greatest leaders, Bishop Athanasius. There he described the growing number of believers inside Axum and explained that they desperately needed teachers and church leaders. After listening carefully, Athanasius made a surprising decision. Instead of sending someone else, he chose Frumentius himself. The former slave was ordained bishop and sent back to Axum. When he returned, he was no longer a servant of the palace. He was now the spiritual leader of an entire nation. Churches began to appear across the kingdom. The royal family openly embraced Christianity. The young king himself accepted the Christian faith. Within a single generation, Axum became one of the first officially Christian kingdoms in history. Long before many European nations accepted Christianity, an African kingdom was already building churches, translating scripture, and proclaiming the gospel. The frightened boy who had arrived in chains became known as the Apostle of Ethiopia. His suffering had never been meaningless. God used slavery to open the doors of a kingdom. Today, millions of Ethiopian Christians trace their spiritual heritage back to the courage of one young man who refused to abandon his faith. Frumentius never commanded an army. He never led a rebellion. He never sought power. He simply remained faithful wherever God placed him. His story reminds us that our circumstances do not define God's plans. Sometimes, the place that looks like the end is exactly where God begins writing history.